I paid for the whole family trip, and my son told the hotel staff I was just the nanny. I sat there frozen, my hands clutching the receipt for the entire trip, my heart shattering in 1,000 invisible pieces. The word echoed in my mind like a curse I couldn't escape. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if for even a second this feels familiar, I only ask that you like this video and subscribe. It will help me keep opening my heart. My name is Margaret, and I'm 72 years old. I've lived in the same cramped apartment on Chicago's North Side for 15 years now, ever since Harold passed away. The walls are thin enough that I can hear Mrs. Chin practicing piano at 6 in the morning, and the radiator clanks like an old ghost every winter night. The smell of fried onions from Dimitri's diner downstairs seeps through my floorboards, mixing with the scent of my lavender soap and the mustiness of old books. Every morning, I wake up to the same routine. The alarm clock Harold bought me in 1987 still works, though the numbers have faded to pale blue shadows. I make coffee in the same chipped mug that says World's Greatest Mom, a gift from my son Michael when he was 12. The irony wasn't lost on me even then. I iron his shirts when he brings them over in garbage bags, fold his children's clothes when his wife Sarah claims she's too busy with her real estate career. My hands move automatically, smoothing wrinkles from fabric that costs more than my monthly grocery budget. But that summer, I thought things would be different. I had been saving money from my small pension, hiding $20 bills in an old coffee tin behind my winter coats. For months, I dreamed of taking the whole family somewhere special. New York City had always seemed like a magical place to me, with its towering buildings and Broadway shows. I imagined walking through Central Park with my grandchildren, Emma and little David, pointing out squirrels and street musicians. I pictured sharing meals with Michael and Sarah, laughing over stories and maybe, just maybe, feeling like I belonged somewhere again. The trip cost me $3,000. $3,000 that I had scraped together from skipping meals, buying generic brands, and wearing the same 3 dresses in rotation. But when I called Michael to tell him about my surprise, his voice was flat, almost annoyed. "Mom, we're really busy this month. Sarah has 3 closings, and I'm working on a new project at the firm." "It's already paid for," I said, my voice smaller than I intended. "The hotel, the flights, everything. I just thought it would be nice for the family to spend some time together." There was a long pause. In the background, I could hear Sarah talking to someone, her laugh sharp and brittle. "Fine," he said finally. "But don't expect us to change our schedule for tourist stuff. And Mom? Don't embarrass us, okay?" I should have known then. The warning signs were scattered like breadcrumbs in a fairy tale I was too desperate to believe had a happy ending. You see, I had been giving and giving for so long that I had forgotten what it felt like to receive. After Harold died of a heart attack in 2021, leaving me with more bills than assets, I threw myself into being useful. When Michael and Sarah bought their house in Lincoln Park, I contributed my entire savings account as a down payment gift. When Emma needed daycare, I became her unpaid babysitter. When Sarah's mother moved to Florida, I became the family's default emergency contact, holiday host, and emotional support system. "Mom, can you watch the kids this weekend? We're going to that wine tasting in Napa." "Mom, can you pick up David from school? My showing ran late." "Mom, can you make your famous pot roast for dinner? The Hendersons are coming over, and Sarah wants to impress them." I said yes to everything. Yes became my native language, the only word they seemed to understand from me. And slowly, without realizing it, I disappeared. I became a function instead of a person, a service instead of a mother. The first time I really noticed was on my 70th birthday. I had mentioned it weeks in advance, even circled the date on the kitchen calendar that hangs next to their refrigerator. I spent the morning cleaning my apartment, just in case they wanted to stop by with a cake or even just a card. I made Harold's favorite chocolate chip cookies, thinking the grandchildren might enjoy them. By evening, my phone hadn't rung. Not once. At 9 p.m., I called Michael. He answered on the 4th ring, sounding distracted. "Oh, Mom. For crying out loud. Was that today? Sarah's been swamped with work, and I completely forgot. We'll make it up to you next week, okay?" But next week came and went. Then the week after that. The cookies grew stale on my counter, and I eventually threw them away, feeling foolish for having hoped. That winter, I caught the flu. It hit me hard, the way illnesses do when you're older and your body feels like it's failing you piece by piece. I had a fever that spiked to 103 degrees, and I was too weak to drive to the pharmacy for medicine. I called Michael, my voice barely a whisper. "I'm really sick, honey. I was wondering if you could pick up some medicine for me? Or maybe just check in tomorrow." "Mom, you're always getting sick lately. It's probably just a cold. Drink some tea and get some rest. Sarah and I are dealing with a client emergency, and the kids have soccer practice. Can't you just call an Uber to the pharmacy?" I hung up the phone and cried. Not because I was sick, but because I realized I was more alone than I had ever been, even in those first awful months after Harold died. But I kept giving. I kept hoping. I kept believing that if I just loved them enough, if I just helped enough, if I just gave enough, they would see me as more than a convenience. When spring arrived, I made the decision to plan the New York trip. I told myself it would be different this time. Away from their busy schedules and Chicago responsibilities, we would reconnect. The children would ask me to tell them stories about when their father was little. Sarah would maybe ask about my own childhood, about the farm in Wisconsin where I grew up. Michael would remember that I was his mother, not just an extra pair of hands. I spent weeks researching hotels, booking flights during the cheapest times, finding family-friendly restaurants and activities. I made spreadsheets, printed confirmations, and organized everything in a bright red folder that I carried with me everywhere. My excitement was childlike, embarrassing in its intensity. The morning we left for LaGuardia, I woke up at 4 a.m., too nervous and excited to sleep. I had packed my best dress, the navy blue one with small flowers that Harold always said made my eyes look brighter. I brought presents for the children, little I Love New York t-shirts I had ordered online, and a guidebook for Michael that highlighted all the historical sites I thought he might find interesting. At the airport, the children were cranky and tired. Emma, who's 9 now with Sarah's sharp features and Michael's dark hair, complained about having to carry her own backpack. David, only 5 and still soft with baby fat, cried when Sarah told him he couldn't have candy for breakfast. "This is why I hate traveling with family," Sarah muttered to Michael, loud enough for me to hear. "Too much drama." I bit my tongue and focused on keeping the boarding passes organized, making sure everyone had their IDs and snacks for the flight. I was useful. I was helping. That had to count for something. The hotel in Midtown Manhattan was nicer than anywhere I had ever stayed. The lobby gleamed with marble floors and crystal chandeliers, and doormen in burgundy uniforms opened doors with practiced smiles. I felt underdressed and out of place, but also thrilled. This was the kind of place I had seen in movies, the kind of place where important people stayed. Michael handled the check-in while I watched the children and organized our luggage. Sarah stood nearby, scrolling through her phone and occasionally sighing dramatically. When the desk clerk asked about our party, Michael gestured toward me and said the words that would change everything. "She's just our nanny. Just our nanny." The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt the blood drain from my face, felt my hands begin to shake. The clerk nodded politely and handed over the room keys, but I couldn't focus on anything except the ringing in my ears. I excused myself to the lobby bathroom, where I sat in a stall and tried to breathe. In the mirror, I looked at myself and barely recognized the woman staring back. When had I become so invisible? When had I stopped being Michael's mother and become just the help? That evening, we went to dinner at a tourist restaurant in Times Square. The children were excited by the bright lights and the costumed characters posing for photos, but I could barely taste my food. Every bite felt like sawdust, every sound felt too loud. I smiled and nodded at appropriate moments, but inside I was screaming. "Are you okay, Grandma?" Emma asked, her small hand reaching for mine across the table. "You look sad." "I'm fine, sweetheart," I said, squeezing her fingers. "Just tired from the travel." But I wasn't fine. I was shattered. The next morning, Sarah asked me to watch the children while she and Michael visited the Metropolitan Museum of Art. "It's not really appropriate for kids their age," she said, not meeting my eyes. "Maybe you could take them to the park or something?" I spent the day in Central Park with Emma and David, pushing David on swings and watching Emma feed ducks at the pond. They were beautiful children, and I loved them deeply, but even in those sweet moments, I felt the sting of exclusion. I was good enough to be their babysitter, but not good enough to join their cultural activities. That night, lying in the hotel bed that I was sharing with Emma while Sarah, Michael, and David had the adjoining room, I made a decision. I couldn't keep living like this. I couldn't keep giving pieces of myself to people who only valued what I could provide, not who I was. When we returned to Chicago, I did something I had never done before. I said no. Michael called 3 days after we got back. "Hey Mom, Sarah and I need to go to a work conference this weekend. Can you watch Emma and David?" "No," I said. The word felt foreign on my tongue. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean I can't watch them this weekend. I have other plans." I didn't have other plans. I was going to spend the weekend alone, reading library books and maybe starting the watercolor painting set I had bought years ago but never opened. But for the first time in years, I was choosing myself. "Mom, what's gotten into you? You never say no to spending time with the grandkids." "Maybe that's the problem," I said, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Finally, Michael spoke, his tone cold and sharp. "Fine. We'll figure something else out. But I don't know what's wrong with you lately. You're acting really strange." After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen and cried. Not from sadness this time, but from something that felt almost like relief. Over the next few weeks, I began to make changes. Small ones at first, then bigger ones. I stopped doing Michael's laundry. I stopped cooking elaborate meals for their dinner parties. I stopped answering the phone every time it rang, especially when it was Sarah calling with another emergency that required my immediate attention. Instead, I called the Chicago Legal Aid Society. I had seen a flyer at the community center near my apartment, and something about it had caught my attention. The woman I spoke with, Janet, was patient and kind. She helped me understand my financial situation and advised me to open a separate bank account that only I had access to. Many older adults find themselves in situations where family members take advantage of their generosity, she explained. It's more common than you might think, and it's not your fault. I also made an appointment with a therapist. Dr. Rodriguez worked out of a small office in Wicker Park, and she specialized in helping older adults navigate family relationships and self-worth issues. The first session was difficult. I cried through most of it, barely able to articulate the pain I had been carrying. It sounds like you've been giving from an empty cup for a very long time, she said gently. What would it look like if you started filling your own cup first? I didn't know how to answer that question. I had been giving for so long that I had forgotten what my own needs even were. But slowly, with Dr. Rodriguez's help, I began to remember. I remembered that I used to love painting. Before Michael was born, before Harold got sick, before life became about everyone else's needs, I had painted watercolors of flowers and landscapes. I remembered that I used to read voraciously, staying up late with mystery novels and biographies. I remembered that I used to have friends, women from the neighborhood who would come over for coffee and conversation. 3 months after the New York trip, I invited the family over for Sunday dinner. They came reluctantly, Sarah checking her phone constantly and Michael making pointed comments about how the house smelled like old person food. But I had things to say, and I was finally ready to say them. After dessert, I pulled out an old family photo from when Michael was about David's age. In the picture, we were at Navy Pier, and Michael was laughing as Harold lifted him onto his shoulders. I looked young and happy, my arms wrapped around both of my boys. With steady hands, I tore the photograph in half. The room went silent. Sarah's mouth fell open, and Michael's face flushed red with anger. "What the hell are you doing?" he demanded. "I'm done," I said quietly. "I'm done being treated like hired help. I'm done being taken for granted. I'm done buying love that should be freely given." "Mom, you're being dramatic," Sarah said, her voice sharp. "We appreciate everything you do." "Do you?" I asked. "Because in New York, when your husband told that clerk I was just the nanny, I realized that's exactly how you see me. Not as Michael's mother, not as your children's grandmother, but as free labor." Michael's face was getting redder. "That was a joke, Mom. You know I didn't mean it." "It wasn't a joke to me," I said. "And I've decided that I'm worth more than being the butt of your joke." I stood up and walked to my bedroom, returning with a manila envelope. Inside were copies of my new bank account statements, my will, and the legal documents I had prepared with Janet's help. "I've made some changes," I said. "I've moved my assets into accounts that only I can access. I've updated my will to reflect my current wishes. And I've established boundaries that I expect you to respect." Sarah laughed, but it sounded forced. "You're cutting us off? Over a misunderstanding?" "I'm not cutting you off," I said. "I'm cutting off the expectation that my money, my time, and my energy belong to you without question. If you want a relationship with me, it will be based on mutual respect and genuine affection. Not on what I can provide." Michael was standing now, pacing like a caged animal. "This is insane, Mom. You're going to destroy our family over your hurt feelings." "Our family was already destroyed," I said. "I'm just finally admitting it." The silence that followed was thick and uncomfortable. Emma, who had been coloring quietly at the kitchen table, looked up with tears in her eyes. "Grandma, are you mad at us?" I knelt down to her level, my heart breaking all over again. "I'm not mad at you, sweetheart. I'm just learning how to take better care of myself." After they left that night, I sat in my living room and felt something I hadn't experienced in years: peace. For the first time in decades, I had stood up for myself. I had drawn boundaries and held them firm, even when it was difficult and painful. But the real test came a few weeks later. I was at the grocery store, comparing prices on canned soup, when I ran into Jane Patterson, my neighbor from down the hall. Jane is a sweet woman in her 60s who has lived in the building longer than I have. We exchanged pleasantries about the weather and the new construction on Clark Street, and then she said something that stopped me cold. "Oh, Margaret, I wanted to mention something. Your son stopped by last week when you weren't home. He seemed concerned about you." "Concerned about me?" I asked, my chest tightening with dread. Jane nodded, her face earnest. "He said you've been acting strangely lately, and that you might not be handling your finances properly anymore. He asked me to keep an eye on you, and to call him if I noticed anything unusual." The world seemed to tilt sideways. Michael had been telling people that I was losing my mental faculties, that I couldn't be trusted to manage my own affairs. It was a strategic move, designed to undermine my independence and make me seem unreliable. He also mentioned that you've been too much of a burden on the family, Jane continued, clearly uncomfortable with sharing this information but thinking she was helping. He said your assistance was becoming more work than it was worth. I thanked Jane and finished my shopping in a daze. At home, I sat at my kitchen table and felt the full weight of my son's betrayal. He wasn't just taking me for granted anymore. He was actively working to discredit me, to paint me as a problem that needed managing rather than a person who deserved respect. But something interesting happened in that moment of realization. Instead of collapsing under the weight of hurt and anger, I felt something different. I felt clear. I looked around my small apartment, at the life I had built and maintained for 15 years. I saw my books, neatly arranged on shelves Harold had built me for our 20th anniversary. I saw the watercolor painting I had finally started, a simple landscape of Lake Michigan at sunset. I saw the African violet that Emma had given me for Mother's Day, thriving on my windowsill despite my initial fears that I would kill it. This was my life. Not the life my son wanted me to have, not the life that would be most convenient for his family, but my own life. And it was good. I called Dr. Rodriguez and scheduled an additional appointment. I needed to talk through this latest revelation, but I wasn't crumbling under it. If anything, I felt more resolved than ever. It sounds like you're not seeking their approval anymore, Dr. Rodriguez observed during our session. How does that feel? Frightening, I admitted. But also liberating. She smiled. That's exactly how it should feel. Growth is usually both things at once. That weekend, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went to the Art Institute of Chicago by myself, taking the Red Line downtown and spending hours walking through galleries I had always wanted to see. I stood in front of Monet's water lilies and felt my eyes fill with tears, not from sadness but from beauty and possibility. In the museum gift shop, I bought myself a silk scarf with a pattern of Van Gogh sunflowers. It was expensive, more than I would normally spend on myself, but I wrapped it around my neck and felt elegant for the first time in years. On the train ride home, I sat next to a woman about my age who complimented my scarf. We struck up a conversation, and I learned that her name was Ruth and that she was a retired art teacher who lived in Rogers Park. I teach watercolor classes at the community center there, she mentioned. You should come sometime. We have a lovely group of women who meet every Wednesday morning. I found myself saying yes. Not the automatic yes of obligation and people-pleasing, but the real yes of genuine interest and self-care. The following Wednesday, I took the bus to Rogers Park and found myself in a bright room filled with easels and laughter. The women in the class ranged in age from 50 to 80, and they welcomed me with a warmth I had forgotten existed. We painted simple still lives, apples in a bowl, flowers in a vase, the view from the classroom window, and talked about everything and nothing. I haven't painted in 30 years, I admitted to Ruth during our break. I'm not sure I remember how. Painting isn't something you forget, she said kindly. It's something you remember. She was right. As my brush moved across the paper, muscle memory kicked in. I remembered the way watercolors bleed and bloom, the way wet paint finds its own path across textured paper. I remembered the meditative quality of focusing on color and light, the way painting made me feel both grounded and transported. For the first time in months, I forgot about Michael and Sarah and their complicated needs. I forgot about being useful or convenient. I just painted. After class, Ruth and I walked to a nearby cafe for coffee. She told me about her late husband, about her children who lived in other cities, about the retirement that hadn't turned out the way she had expected. I spent so many years taking care of everyone else, she said, stirring honey into her tea. It took me until I was 70 to realize I was a person worth taking care of too. I nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. As autumn arrived in Chicago, I felt myself changing in ways that surprised me. I bought new clothes, not practical, sensible clothes, but clothes that made me feel pretty. A burgundy wool coat that flattered my complexion. A pair of boots with small heels that made me feel taller and more confident. Simple jewelry that caught the light when I moved. I also started exploring my neighborhood in new ways. I discovered a used bookstore tucked into a basement on Lincoln Avenue, where the owner, a man named Samuel, set aside mystery novels he thought I might like. I found a bakery where the Polish woman who ran it always remembered that I liked extra cinnamon in my coffee. I joined a book club at the library that met monthly to discuss everything from contemporary fiction to classic literature. My world was expanding, and I was remembering what it felt like to exist as more than someone's mother or grandmother or helper. But the biggest change came on a Tuesday evening in October. I was reading in my living room when someone knocked on my door. Through the peephole, I saw Emma standing in the hallway, holding a piece of construction paper. "Grandma," she called softly. "Are you home?" I opened the door to find my granddaughter holding a hand-drawn card. On the front, in her careful 9-year-old handwriting, she had written, "Thank you for being my hero, Grandma." Inside was a picture of the two of us holding hands, surrounded by hearts and flowers. "I made this for you at school," she said, suddenly shy. "We were supposed to make cards for someone we admire." I knelt down and hugged her, breathing in the smell of her strawberry shampoo and the faint scent of school cafeteria that still clung to her clothes. "Where are your parents?" I asked. "Daddy's in the car. He said I could come up for just a minute." She looked around my apartment with curious eyes. "Your place looks different, Grandma. It's pretty." I realized she was right. Over the past few months, I had made small changes that transformed my small space. I had hung my watercolor paintings on the walls, bought a few plants, rearranged the furniture to create a cozy reading nook by the window. It did look pretty. It looked like a place where someone lived and thrived, not just existed. "Emma, I want you to know something important," I said, taking her small hands in mine. "I love you and your brother more than words can say. That will never change, no matter what happens with the grown-ups. Do you understand?" She nodded solemnly. "I love you too, Grandma. And I don't think you're just a nanny. I think you're the best grandma in the world." After she left, I sat on my couch and cried. But these were different tears, tears of gratitude and hope rather than pain and despair. I realized that my relationship with my grandchildren didn't have to be destroyed by the dysfunction with their parents. Emma and David were innocent in this situation, and they deserved to have a grandmother who was whole and healthy rather than bitter and depleted. Winter arrived early that year, with snow falling before Halloween and Lake Michigan freezing into a gray expanse that stretched to the horizon. But I felt warmer than I had in years. My Tuesday morning watercolor classes had become the highlight of my week, and Ruth and I had developed a genuine friendship that filled some of the loneliness I had carried for so long. In December, she asked if I wanted to join her for a Christmas concert at the Symphony Center downtown. It was a Thursday evening performance, and I realized it would be the first time in years that I wouldn't be available if Michael or Sarah called with an emergency or request. "I'd love to," I said without hesitation. The concert was magical. We dressed up, Ruth in an elegant black dress and me in a navy blue dress I had bought specifically for the occasion, and took the train into the city as snow fell softly outside the windows. The orchestra played familiar Christmas carols and beautiful classical pieces, and I felt my spirit lift with the music. During intermission, as we sipped champagne in the lobby, Ruth looked at me thoughtfully. "You look different than when you started coming to painting class," she said. "Lighter, somehow." "I feel different," I admitted. "I feel like myself again, if that makes sense." She smiled. "It makes perfect sense. Sometimes we have to remember who we were before we became who everyone else needed us to be." That night, I slept more peacefully than I had in months. I dreamed of painting by the lake, of concerts and books and conversations with friends. I dreamed of a life that was mine. The holidays that year were different. Instead of hosting a big Christmas dinner and running myself ragged trying to make everything perfect, I accepted Ruth's invitation to join her and some friends for a potluck at the community center. It was casual and warm, filled with laughter and stories and the kind of easy affection I had forgotten existed. I brought my famous pot roast, not because anyone expected it from me, but because I wanted to contribute something delicious to a meal I was genuinely excited to attend. On Christmas morning, Emma called me on the phone her parents had finally allowed her to have. "Merry Christmas, Grandma," she said, her voice bright with excitement. "I got art supplies. Mommy said you've been painting, and I want to learn too. Maybe we can paint together sometime," I said, my heart swelling with happiness. "I'd like that," she said. "Daddy says you're different now, but I think you're just more happy?" Out of the mouths of babes. My 9-year-old granddaughter could see what her father couldn't or wouldn't acknowledge, that I was healthier and happier now that I was taking care of myself. As winter melted into spring, I reflected on the changes of the past year. I had lost some things that I thought were precious: the automatic inclusion in family events, the feeling of being needed and useful, the illusion of closeness with my son and daughter-in-law. But I had gained so much more. I had gained self-respect and genuine friendships. I had gained hobbies and interests that brought me joy. I had gained the knowledge that I could take care of myself, that I was worthy of care and attention and love, even if that love came primarily from myself. Most importantly, I had gained the understanding that real love, the kind worth having, doesn't come with conditions or expectations. It doesn't require you to diminish yourself to make others comfortable. It doesn't ask you to buy it with money or services or constant availability. The relationship with Emma and David was slowly rebuilding on healthier ground. They would call sometimes just to talk, not because they needed something from me. Emma had started sending me pictures of her own watercolor experiments, and David would tell me elaborate stories about his kindergarten adventures. As for Michael and Sarah, we had settled into a distant but civil relationship. They no longer called with emergencies or expectations, and I no longer felt the compulsion to offer help they didn't genuinely want. It was sadder but more honest than what we had before. On a warm May morning, almost a year after that devastating trip to New York, I sat by Lake Michigan with my watercolor supplies and painted the sunrise. The sky was a symphony of pink and gold and orange, reflected in the gentle waves that lapped against the shore. As I painted, I thought about the woman I had been 12 months ago, desperate for approval, exhausted from giving, invisible to the people she loved most. That woman felt like a stranger to me now, someone I could feel compassion for but could no longer identify with fully. The woman I was now had boundaries and friendships and hobbies. She had savings accounts that only she could access and legal documents that reflected her actual wishes. She had favorite restaurants and weekly commitments and plans for the future that didn't revolve around anyone else's needs. She had painted her way back to herself, brushstroke by careful brushstroke. A jogger ran past, nodding politely, and I realized I was smiling. Not the forced, placating smile I had worn for so many years, but a genuine expression of contentment. I finished the painting as the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the park. In my picture, the lake stretched endlessly toward the horizon, full of possibility and light. It was imperfect, my technique still had a long way to go, but it was mine. As I packed up my supplies, I thought about the question Dr. Rodriguez had asked me months ago: what would it look like if you started filling your own cup first? Now I knew. It looked like this: a Tuesday morning by the lake, painting something beautiful for no reason other than the joy of creating it. It looked like genuine friendships and boundaries that protected my energy and resources. It looked like saying no without guilt and yes without obligation. It looked like remembering that I was a person worthy of love and respect, including, and especially, from myself. On the bus ride home, I thought about all the women who might be listening to this story, who might be living some version of it themselves. Women who have given so much for so long that they've forgotten they're allowed to keep something for themselves. Women who have bought love with services and money and availability, only to discover that purchased affection is hollow and unsustaining. If that's you, if any part of my story feels familiar, I want you to know something: it's never too late to remember who you are. It's never too late to set boundaries, to say no, to choose yourself. It takes courage, and it's often lonely at first, and the people who have benefited from your self-sacrifice may not understand or appreciate the changes. But on the other side of that difficulty is a life that belongs to you. A life where your worth isn't determined by your usefulness, where your relationships are based on genuine mutual affection rather than transaction and obligation. You deserve that life. You've always deserved it. The scars from that terrible family trip to New York will always be with me. The memory of my son calling me just the nanny still stings when I think about it. But those scars have become something different now, not wounds that drain my energy, but reminders of my strength and resilience. Every morning when I wake up in my small Chicago apartment, when I make coffee in that chipped mug and plan a day that belongs entirely to me, I remember, I am not just anyone's nanny. I am Margaret. I am an artist and a friend and a woman who learned, perhaps later than she should have, that the most important love affair of her life was the one she needed to have with herself. And that, my dear listeners, has made all the difference. There's something else I want to share with you, something that happened just last month that reminded me how far I've come and how much further I still have to go. It was a Tuesday morning. I've grown to love Tuesdays because they're my painting days, and I was getting ready to leave for my watercolor class when my phone rang. It was Michael. We hadn't spoken in several weeks, which had become our new normal. The conversation started pleasantly enough, the kind of surface-level check-in that had replaced our deeper but more painful interactions. "Hi Mom, how are you doing?" "I'm well, honey," I said, surprising myself with how genuine that felt. "I'm actually just heading out to my painting class." There was a pause. "Right, Sarah mentioned you were doing some kind of art thing." The dismissive tone was subtle, but I caught it. The old me would have minimized my hobby, made it seem less important than it was. But I didn't do that. "It's not some kind of art thing," I said calmly. "It's watercolor painting, and it brings me a lot of joy." Another pause. Then Michael cleared his throat. "Actually, Mom, that's kind of what I wanted to talk to you about. Sarah and I have been talking, and we're concerned that you're maybe becoming a bit isolated. Spending too much time on hobbies instead of staying connected with family." I almost laughed. The irony was breathtaking. For months, they had barely included me in their lives, and now that I had built a life that didn't revolve around their needs, I was becoming isolated. "I'm not isolated, Michael," I said. "I have friends. I have activities that fulfill me. I'm probably more socially engaged now than I've been in years." "But you've been turning down family events," he said, and I could hear the manipulation creeping into his voice. "Emma's recital last month, Sunday dinner at the Hendersons." "I wasn't invited to Emma's recital," I said quietly. "You told me about it after it happened." And the Henderson dinner was for Sarah's business contacts. I never felt like my presence was actually wanted there. The silence stretched uncomfortably. Finally, Michael spoke again, and his voice had changed. The false warmth was gone, replaced by something colder and more direct. Look, Mom, we need to talk about something else. Sarah and I have been discussing your financial situation. My stomach dropped. Here it was. The real reason for the call. What about my financial situation? Well, we're concerned that you might be making decisions that aren't in your best interest. Moving all your money around, cutting us off from helping you manage things. I took a deep breath. I had been prepared for this conversation for months, ever since Janet at Legal Aid had warned me it might come. My financial situation is fine, Michael. Better than it's been in years, actually, since I'm not spending my savings on trips and gifts that aren't appreciated. That's not fair, Mom. We appreciate, do you? I interrupted, and my voice was steadier than I felt. Because when I spent $3,000 on that New York trip, you called me just the nanny. When I gave you $20,000 for your house down payment, you never even sent a thank you card. When I buy Christmas presents for the children, Sarah returns half of them because they're not on brand for your family's image. Mom, that's not. He trailed off, perhaps realizing he couldn't actually deny any of those things. I want you to know that I've spoken with an attorney, I continued. My will is updated, my finances are protected, and my guardianship preferences are clearly documented. If you're concerned about my mental competency, you're welcome to pursue legal channels, but you'll find that I've been very thorough in protecting myself. The silence that followed was deafening. When Michael finally spoke, his voice was tight with anger. I can't believe you would threaten your own son. I'm not threatening you, I said. I'm protecting myself. There's a difference. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, shaking. Not from fear, but from the adrenaline of standing up for myself so clearly and completely. The old me would have crumbled under his manipulation, would have apologized and offered to give back whatever financial independence I had claimed. But I didn't do that. Instead, I called Ruth and asked if she wanted to go for coffee after our painting class. I needed to talk to someone who understood, someone who had walked a similar path. At the coffee shop near the community center, I told Ruth about the conversation. She listened with the patience of someone who had lived through her own family betrayals and disappointments. You know what I find interesting about your story, she said when I finished. It's not really about the money or even about being called a nanny. It's about recognition. You wanted them to see you as a person, not just a function. She was right. That's exactly what it was about. My daughter lives in Portland now, Ruth continued, stirring sugar into her coffee. We talk maybe once a month, usually when she needs something. For years, I chased her approval, sent gifts, visited when it was convenient for her schedule. And then one day I realized I was performing the role of mother rather than actually being one. What did you do? I asked. I stopped performing. I stopped calling first, stopped initiating visits, stopped sending money for things she should have been handling herself. At first, she barely noticed. Then she got angry. Then she went through a whole phase of telling people I had become difficult and selfish. Ruth smiled, but there was sadness in it. Now we have what I call a maintenance relationship. We check in, we're polite, she sends pictures of her kids occasionally. It's not the mother-daughter relationship I dreamed of, but it's honest. And I've built a life that doesn't depend on her approval or presence. I nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. Do you miss the old dynamic? Even though it was unhealthy? Sometimes, she admitted. There was something addictive about feeling needed, even if it was in all the wrong ways. But I don't miss the anxiety, the constant worry about whether I was doing enough, giving enough, being enough. I don't miss making myself small so other people could feel bigger. That afternoon, I went to my painting class with a new sense of clarity. We were working on a landscape study, trying to capture the way afternoon light filtered through trees in Lincoln Park. As I mixed greens and browns on my palette, I found myself thinking about the layers of a painting and how they related to the layers of a life. When I first started painting again, my watercolors were timid and over-controlled. I was afraid to let the paint bleed, afraid to make mistakes, afraid to take up too much space on the paper. But as I grew more confident, my paintings became bolder. I learned to let colors run into each other, creating beautiful accidents and unexpected combinations. Maybe that's what was happening in my life too. I was finally learning to take up space, to let my own colors show through, to trust that even my mistakes could create something beautiful. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called my old friend Dorothy, a woman I had known since Harold and I were first married. We had lost touch gradually after Harold died, the way friendships sometimes do when life becomes too heavy to maintain them. Dorothy was delighted to hear from me. Margaret, I've been thinking about you. How are you doing, honey? We talked for nearly 2 hours, catching up on decades of news and changes. She told me about her grandchildren in California, about the volunteer work she was doing at a local animal shelter, about the book club she had joined that met in the back room of a wine bar in Evanston. "You should come sometime," she said. "We read everything, literary fiction, memoirs, even the occasional romance novel. And the wine is very good." "I'd like that," I said, and realized I meant it. "You sound different, Margaret," Dorothy observed. "Stronger, somehow." "I feel different," I said. "I've been learning some hard lessons about family and expectations and self-worth. Care to share?" So I told her. Not the whole story, that would have taken all night, but the essential parts. The trip to New York, the nanny comment, the gradual recognition that I had been buying love that was never really for sale. Dorothy listened without judgment, occasionally making small sounds of understanding or sympathy. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "You know, I went through something similar with my brother and his wife," she finally said. "They treated me like a convenient aunt figure, useful for babysitting and emergency money, but not really part of the family. It took me too long to realize that I was collaborating in my own diminishment." "How do you mean?" "Every time I said yes when I wanted to say no, every time I gave money I couldn't afford, every time I accommodated their schedule while ignoring my own needs, I was teaching them that my feelings and preferences didn't matter. I was training them to see me as a resource rather than a person." Her words hit me like a gentle but firm slap. She was right. I had been an active participant in the dynamic that hurt me so deeply. Not because I deserved to be treated poorly, but because I had consistently prioritized their comfort over my own dignity. "So what did you do?" I asked. "I changed the rules," she said simply. "I started saying no. I started asking questions like, 'What's in this for me?' and 'How does this serve my needs?' I stopped being available at their convenience and started being available on my own terms." "How did they react?" Dorothy laughed, but it wasn't bitter. "They were baffled. Then angry. Then they tried to guilt me back into the old patterns. When none of that worked, they actually started treating me better. Funny how that works." After we hung up, I realized something important. I wasn't alone in this experience. There were women all over the world learning the same difficult lessons about boundaries and self-worth, about the difference between being loved and being useful. Over the next few weeks, I started reaching out to other people from my past. I called my old neighbor from the House Herald and I shared in Oak Park. I looked up a former colleague from my part-time job at the library. I even reached out to my cousin Patricia, who lived in Milwaukee and whom I hadn't spoken to in 5 years. Each conversation was a small act of reclamation. I was rebuilding a social network that wasn't dependent on my role as mother or grandmother or helper. I was remembering what it felt like to be chosen for my company rather than my usefulness. Some of these reconnections were wonderfully successful. Patricia and I discovered we had both become passionate about gardening, and we started planning a weekend trip to visit the botanical gardens in Madison. My old library colleague, Helen, was going through her own family struggles and found comfort in sharing our experiences. Other attempts at reconnection didn't work as well. Some people had changed too much, or we had grown in incompatible directions. Some relationships had been more circumstantial than I remembered, based on proximity rather than genuine affinity. But that was okay too. I was learning to let go of relationships that didn't serve me, just as I had learned to let go of the fantasy of unconditional family acceptance. The real test of my progress came in June, when Emma graduated from 4th grade. Michael called to invite me to the ceremony, and for a moment, I felt the old pull of automatic acceptance. "When is it?" I asked. "Thursday morning at 10, he said. "The ceremony is only about an hour, but we're taking her to lunch afterward to celebrate." Thursday morning was my painting class. For the first time since I had started attending, I had a direct conflict with something family-related. "I have a commitment Thursday morning," I said. "What kind of commitment?" In the past, I would have minimized my painting class, made it sound less important than it was. But I didn't do that. "I have an art class that's important to me." There was a pause. "Mom, this is Emma's graduation. Family comes first." "Does it?" I asked. "Because when I needed help during my illness last year, your work came first. When I planned that New York trip, your schedules came first. When I've needed emotional support, Sarah's real estate career has come first." "That's different." "No, Michael, it's not. My art class is important to me, and I've made a commitment to be there. I'll need to miss Emma's ceremony." The silence was cold and sharp. Finally, Michael spoke, and his voice was hurt and angry. "Fine. I'll tell Emma that her grandmother chose painting over her graduation." The manipulation was so obvious, so calculated to make me feel guilty, that I almost laughed. "You can tell Emma whatever you want," I said calmly. "But if you tell her that, you'll be lying. I'm not choosing painting over her. I'm choosing to honor my commitments and maintain the life I've built for myself." If you had invited me with more notice, or if you had ever shown interest in working around my schedule the way I've always worked around yours, this wouldn't be a problem. After I hung up, I felt terrible for about 10 minutes. Then I called Ruth. I just told my son I'm not coming to Emma's graduation, I confessed. How do you feel about that? Guilty, I admitted. But also proud of myself. Is that weird? Not at all, Ruth said. You're learning to honor your own priorities. That's healthy. On Thursday morning, I went to my painting class. We were working on a complex study of flowers in different stages of bloom, some buds just opening, others in full flower, a few beginning to fade. As I painted, I thought about cycles and seasons, about the beauty that exists in all stages of growth and change. After class, I stopped by a card shop and bought a beautiful graduation card for Emma. I wrote a heartfelt note inside, telling her how proud I was of her accomplishments and how much I loved her. I mailed it that afternoon, along with a small gift certificate to an art supply store. 2 days later, Emma called me. Grandma, I got your card. Daddy said you were sick and couldn't come to graduation. I paused, choosing my words carefully. I had another commitment that I couldn't change, sweetheart. But I thought about you all morning, and I'm so proud of you for finishing 4th grade. Did you know I got the art award? She said, her voice bright with excitement. No, I didn't. Tell me all about it. As she chattered about her award and her summer plans, I realized something important. My absence from the ceremony hadn't damaged our relationship. If anything, Emma seemed happier to talk to me on the phone, where she had my full attention, than she often did at family gatherings where the adults are distracted by their own complicated dynamics. That conversation taught me something crucial about boundaries. They don't have to hurt the people we love. In fact, healthy boundaries often improve our relationships because they help us show up more authentically and with better energy. Summer passed peacefully. I continued my painting classes, took that trip to Madison with Patricia, joined Dorothy's book club, and spent quiet evenings reading in my apartment. I felt more content than I had in years. In August, something unexpected happened. Sarah called me directly, which was unusual since most communication came through Michael. Margaret, I wanted to talk to you about something, she began, and her voice was different than usual, less sharp, more tentative. Of course, I said, curious. I've been thinking about what you said last spring, about feeling unappreciated and taken for granted. And I wanted to apologize. I was too surprised to respond immediately. I think I got caught up in the busyness of our life and forgot to treat you with the respect you deserve, she continued. You've done so much for our family, and we haven't always acknowledged that appropriately. It was a good apology, specific, accountable, and seemingly genuine. But I had learned to be cautious about dramatic changes in family dynamics. I appreciate you saying that, Sarah, I said carefully. I was wondering if you'd be willing to join us for dinner sometime soon. Just family, no business associates or social obligations. Maybe we could start over with a clean slate. Part of me wanted to say yes immediately. The old me would have jumped at this olive branch, would have seen it as validation that my boundary setting had worked to restore the family dynamic I had always wanted. But I had learned to pause, to consider my motivations and expectations before responding. Can I think about it and get back to you? I asked. Of course, she said. Take your time. After we hung up, I called Dr. Rodriguez. Even though our regular sessions had ended months ago, she had told me I could check in whenever I needed guidance with difficult decisions. It sounds like a positive step, she said after I described the conversation. But I'm curious about your hesitation. I guess I'm afraid of falling back into old patterns, I admitted. What if I go to this dinner and they're nice to me, and I start giving and giving again because it feels so good to be included? What would it look like to go to dinner without giving anything more than your presence? She asked. It was a good question. Could I have dinner with my family without automatically offering to babysit, or help with chores, or contribute money to their latest need? Could I simply show up as myself, without trying to earn my place at the table? I think I could try that, I said. When I called Sarah back, I set clear parameters. I'd be happy to have dinner with you, I said. Let's pick a date that works for everyone, and I'll bring dessert. But I want you to know that I'm not available for babysitting or other help right now. I'm committed to maintaining the boundaries I've established. That's fine, she said quickly. We just want to spend time with you. The dinner was scheduled for a Saturday evening in early September. I spent the morning painting by the lake, trying to maintain my centered feeling before what could be an emotionally complicated evening. I arrived at their Lincoln Park house at 6 o'clock, carrying a store-bought apple pie. In the past, I would have spent hours making something from scratch, would have arrived early to help with preparations. But I had learned to give what I could offer comfortably, not what I thought would impress them most. The evening was pleasant, but carefully polite. Michael and Sarah made an obvious effort to include me in conversations, to ask about my painting classes and book club. The children were affectionate and chatty, telling me about their summer camps and school preparations. But I could feel the undercurrent of artificial warmth, the performance of family harmony that didn't quite feel natural yet. We were all trying, but we were also all being careful, watching for signs of the old dysfunctions creeping back in. When dinner was finished, Michael and Sarah started clearing dishes, and I felt the automatic impulse to jump up and help. Instead, I stayed seated and continued my conversation with Emma about her latest reading projects. "Don't you want to help clean up?" David asked innocently. "I think your parents have it handled," I said with a smile. "Tell me more about that science project you're working on." It was a small moment, but it felt significant. I was learning to resist the pull of automatic helpfulness, to trust that other people could handle their own responsibilities. As the evening wound down, Sarah walked me to the door. "Thank you for coming," she said. This felt better. More relaxed. It did, I agreed. "Though I think we're all still figuring out how to be together in this new way." She nodded. "Maybe we can do this again sometime. No agenda, no expectations. Just family dinner." "I'd like that," I said, and realized I meant it. Driving home through the Chicago streets, I reflected on how far I had come. A year ago, that dinner would have felt like a victory, proof that my family loved me after all. Tonight, it had felt like what it was, a pleasant evening with people I cared about who were making an effort to treat me better. The difference was that my sense of worth no longer depended on their effort. I had learned to fill my own cup, to build a life that was satisfying and meaningful regardless of how my family chose to relate to me. That realization felt like the final piece of a puzzle I had been working on for months. I was complete, whether or not they chose to see me clearly. I was valuable, whether or not they chose to appreciate me. I was worthy of love, whether or not they chose to love me well. As I pulled into the parking spot behind my apartment building, I felt a deep sense of peace settle over me. Tomorrow was Sunday, and I had no obligations except the ones I had chosen for myself. I would read, maybe paint, perhaps call Ruth or Dorothy to see if they wanted to meet for coffee. My life was small in some ways, contained within the boundaries of what I could control and influence. But it was mine, and it was good, and it was enough. And that, more than any family reconciliation or external validation, was the truest victory of all. Have you ever felt invisible to the people who should see you most clearly? Have you ever given so much of yourself that you forgot there was someone worth protecting at your core? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Your experiences matter, and sharing them might help someone else who is struggling with the same painful questions. If this story touched your heart, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. Together, we can keep opening our hearts and reminding each other that we are all worthy of love, respect, and the beautiful, imperfect lives we create for ourselves. Until next time, remember, you are not just anyone's anything. You are yourself, and that is enough.